A kind-hearted man buys lunch for a homeless girl, but her cryptic whispers hint at a dark secret that sends shivers down his spine. What begins as lunch quickly turns into a life-altering moment filled with danger and unanswered questions. Her haunting whispers reveal a danger that feels impossibly close. But before we start, if you guys like this story, please comment below and subscribe to Story Store. Please hit the bell icon. Thank you. The restaurant door slammed open with a gust of cold January wind, startling Mark as he nearly dropped his coffee. He turned to see a young girl, no older than 10, her hair tangled and face smeared with dirt. She stood frozen at the entrance, her thin, patched coat doing nothing to shield her from the biting chill. Her wide, hollow eyes scanned the room, locking on Mark as if she'd been looking for him specifically. "Hey, kid," Mark said cautiously, setting down his cup. He noticed the other patrons eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. She hesitated, then shuffled toward him, her sneakers leaving wet streaks on the floor. Without a word, she sat across from him, her hands clutching the edges of the table as though it were the only solid thing in her world. Mark watched the girl devour her meal with a desperation that broke his heart. She hadn't spoken much, only whispering her name, Lila, when he introduced himself. Her tiny frame shook slightly as she ate, the cold clearly still clinging to her. When he gently asked about her parents, Lila's fork froze midway to her mouth. Her wide eyes met his, and for the first time, she spoke more than a word. "They're gone," she murmured. "He took them." Her words hung in the air like a ghost, filling the silence between them with a tension Mark couldn't shake. He leaned forward, his voice soft. "Who?" he asked. But Lila only shook her head, her small hands gripping the edges of the table. Mark realized then that this wasn't just hunger. This was fear. Lila's voice was barely above a whisper as she recounted the chilling story. "It was a man," she began, her eyes fixed on the table. "He wore a red hat. He came up to us when we were on the street." Her voice trembled as she continued. "He said he had food and a place to stay. My parents told me to wait by the corner while they talked to him." Her small hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "They never came back." Mark's stomach churned. He wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, but the fear in her voice was undeniable. "Did you see where he took them?" he asked gently. Lila shook her head. "Number. But later I saw him again near the train station. He was looking for me. I hid." Her voice broke, and she glanced over her shoulder as though expecting him to appear. Mark leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Lila, you're safe now. He won't find you here." But even as he said it, a prickling sense of unease crept over him. Who was this man in the red hat, and what had he done to this girl's family? Mark's mind raced as he tried to process what Lila had told him. Could a man really be hunting this girl, or was it the overactive imagination of a frightened child? Either way, her terror was palpable, and he couldn't ignore it. He briefly considered calling the police but stopped when Lila grabbed his arm, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "He has people everywhere. If you call them, he'll find me." Her words unsettled Mark. He'd never seen fear like this before, not even in the harshest corners of life he'd encountered. As much as he wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lila's story held truth. The thought of sending her back onto the streets felt like a betrayal, but what could he do? He didn't know her or the danger she claimed to face. "All right," he said after a long silence, his voice calm but firm. "I won't call anyone, but you can't stay out here alone. You'll come with me, and we'll figure this out together." Lila stared at him, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and hope. Mark wasn't sure if he'd made the right choice, but he knew one thing. He couldn't abandon her now. Mark took Lila to his apartment, a modest space that felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos she described. The small living room, with its worn couch and cluttered bookshelves, became her refuge. Mark handed her a warm blanket and let her pick a spot on the couch. She curled up immediately, her exhaustion catching up with her. While she rested, he rummaged through his kitchen, piecing together a simple dinner. When Lila woke, she ate silently, but at a calmer pace, her wary eyes softening just a little. As the evening wore on, she opened up about her life before the man in the red hat appeared. She spoke of happier times, her family's love for each other, and how quickly things unraveled when they lost their home. Her words were halting, often interrupted by long silences, but Mark listened patiently, offering quiet reassurances. He realized how much she'd been forced to grow up in such a short time. By the time she drifted off to sleep again, Mark felt a fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected. He vowed to keep her safe, no matter what it took, and began to consider how he could shield her from the nightmare she was running from. That night, Mark couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The apartment, usually their sanctuary, felt suffocating. He checked the locks twice, the windows once more, and kept the living room light on, despite it being well past midnight. Lila, normally a heavy sleeper, jolted awake with a blood-curdling scream. Her eyes were wide with terror, her voice barely a whisper. "He's outside, the man with the dark eyes." Mark rushed to the window but found nothing, no shadow, no movement, just the quiet hum of the night. Yet Lila's fear was undeniable, her body trembling uncontrollably. She clung to him, her breath shallow. Though Mark reassured her, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The weight of her words hung in the air like a lingering cloud. Was it just her paranoia? Or was something truly lurking outside, waiting? Over the following days, Mark was consumed with trying to make sense of Lila's cryptic fragments. She recalled the man mentioning a warehouse, a grim symbol etched on his car, but her memory was fragmented, clouded by terror. Desperate for answers, Mark dove into research, combing through online forums, whisper networks, and any local contacts he could find. It wasn't long before he stumbled across unsettling rumors, talk of a human trafficking ring operating in the area. The descriptions matched far too closely to Lila's vague recollections. The man's eyes, the dark symbol, and the mention of a warehouse. Mark's stomach churned as the pieces started to align, forming a terrifying image of what might be happening right under their noses. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The danger was real. Lila's fear, now his own, wasn't just a paranoid delusion, it was a warning. Mark's investigation led him to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. His gut screamed at him to turn back, but his resolve was stronger. He left Lila with a trusted neighbor, warning her not to answer the door for anyone. The warehouse was eerily quiet, its dark corners hiding secrets that had been kept too long. As Mark rummaged through old crates, he uncovered unsettling evidence. Photographs of missing people, files detailing the operations, and strange equipment he couldn't begin to understand. The air felt thick with dread as he scanned the room. Suddenly, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. His heart skipped a beat. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Standing in the doorway was the man in the red hat, cold, calculating eyes locked onto Mark's. It was too late to escape now. The confrontation had begun. The standoff was short but intense. Mark, fueled by a mix of fear and adrenaline, managed to slip past the man and escape the warehouse. Once he reached safety, he immediately called the authorities, his voice trembling as he reported what he'd found. Within hours, police swarmed the warehouse, uncovering the horrifying truth about the trafficking ring. The man in the red hat was arrested, along with several accomplices. Despite the success, Mark's heart sank when Lila's parents were not among the rescued. The pain of knowing they might never be found was unbearable. But as Lila looked to him for support, Mark made a silent vow. He would be her protector. From that moment on, he became her guardian, offering the stability she had lost. Though the future was uncertain, they would face it together, stronger for having already survived the darkest of nights.